Some cities don't just get cold in winter, they become it. Lunaris is one of those places, where the frost doesn't stop at the windows, where it creeps through the walls and settles quietly into the people, into their routines, into the careful distance they keep from one another. Here, survival is a discipline. Feeling is a luxury no one can afford. And no one has mastered the art of not feeling quite like Elliot Drake. He built walls the way other men build legacies, with precision, with purpose, and with the quiet certainty that nothing and no one would ever get close enough to bring them down. He is the alphaking of Lunaris in every sense that matters. Feared in boardrooms, obeyed without question, admired from a safe and careful distance. The Drake name opens doors. It also closes hearts, his own most of all. Out there is something locked inside him, something that hasn't moved in years, something that howls in silence on the coldest winter nights. And Elliot has learned expertly to ignore it. Then she arrives, not with a grand entrance, not with fanfare, just a voice, her voice, cutting through the noise of a crowded room like light through ice. Maya Bellamy doesn't belong here. She knows it. The city knows it. She is a woman with no pack, no anchor, no permanent address, only a gift she never asked for, and a road that never seems to end. She sings and things shift. Not metaphorically. The air changes. The room breathes differently. And somewhere deep inside, a man who had decided he was done with warmth. Something stirs. Neither of them understands yet what has been set in motion. Neither of them knows the cost. But the ice has already heard the music. And in Lunaris, when the ice begins to crack, everything beneath it rises. Don't say you weren't warned. The boardroom on the 43rd floor had no paintings. People noticed that, eventually. They would walk in for the first time, sharp in their best suits. Rehearsed smiles already fading as the elevator doors opened, and they would scan the room the way people scan any room of power. Looking for clues. Looking for the man before they found the man. They would see the floor-to-ceiling glass overlooking a city swallowed in white. They would see the obsidian table, long enough to seat 20, cold enough to feel like a slab. They would see the chairs, identical, upright, unforgiving, and then they would notice the walls, bare, every single one. No portraits of past victories. No framed headlines celebrating the Drake Empire's latest acquisition. No family photographs. Nothing that suggested the man who owned this room had ever, in his entire life, felt something worth preserving. Most people assumed it was a power move. Minimalism as intimidation. They were wrong. Elliot Drake simply hadn't noticed the walls were empty. He was already at the head of the table when they filed in. He was always already there, as though he never left, as though the building itself exhaled him each morning and absorbed him back each night. 41 years old and built like someone had decided, at the cellular level, that softness was a design flaw. Dark suit, no tie, eyes the color of a frozen lake, that particular shade of gray-blue that looks beautiful from a distance and deeply dangerous up close. He didn't look up when they entered. He was reading, a single sheet of paper held in one hand, the other hand flat on the table, perfectly still, the way predators go still when something in the distance has caught their attention and they are deciding with absolute calm whether it is worth moving for. The 12 people who filed into that boardroom that morning had a combined net worth of $4 billion. 3 of them had law degrees from institutions that charged more per year than most people earned in a lifetime. One had testified before a Senate committee. Another had restructured the debt of an entire country. Every single one of them sat down quietly and waited for Elliot Drake to finish reading his page. He made them wait 7 minutes. No one checked their watch twice. All per the one part. This is the part that's hard to explain to people who've never met someone like him. The way power, Real power has nothing to do with volume. Elliot never raised his voice. In 12 years of running Lunaris Pack Enterprises, there was not a single recorded incident of him shouting, losing his composure, or showing anything that could be categorized, clinically, as emotion. He spoke in full sentences. Measured, precise. Each word placed exactly where he intended it, like furniture in a room he had arranged in his mind long before he walked into it. When he finally set the paper down and looked up, the room contracted slightly. That subtle, collective intake of breath that crowds make when a predator turns their head. Page 9, he said. The Miami clause. Someone explained to me why it's still there. Silence. And then a man at the far end, young, eager, visibly perspiring, cleared his throat. The legal team felt it provided a safety net in case It provides the other party an exit, Elliot said, not loudly, almost gently, which means it provides them leverage, which means someone in this room negotiated against us. He paused. Remove it. Renegotiate the entire section. And whoever approved it in the first iteration. Another pause. Surgical. Don't be in this building tomorrow. He looked back down at his papers. Meeting adjourned. Here is a question, and be honest with yourself when you answer it. Have you ever been so good at appearing fine that people stopped asking if you were? Because that was Elliot Drake's true empire. Not the glass tower. Not the 12 acquisitions in 6 years. And not the Lunaris seat of power. Not the wolf bloodline that other packs whispered about like a myth. His real empire was the one he had built inside himself. Wall by wall, room by room, until the man who used to laugh, and he did laugh once, loudly and without self-consciousness, had been so thoroughly renovated that not even he could find the original architecture anymore. His brother's name was Cole. Elliot did not say that name out loud. Not anymore. Not for 3 years, 4 months, and Pakop, though he would deny to his last breath that he counted. 16 days. Cole had been everything Elliot was not. Warm where Elliot was cool. Reckless where Elliot was calculated. The kind of man who remembered the names of waitstaff, who sent voice notes instead of emails, who showed up to things early and stayed too late, and somehow made everyone in the room feel like the party had been waiting for them specifically. Cole had trusted the wrong person inside the pack, and the pack had let him. And Elliot. Elliot, who had built an empire on anticipating threats, on reading rooms, on knowing, had not seen it coming. That was the wound under everything. Not grief, exactly. Grief he could have worked with. Grief has a shape. Grief eventually exhausts itself. This was something colder. This was the specific, airless agony of a man who believed in the marrow of his bones that if he had simply paid more attention, his brother would still be alive. So he paid attention to everything now, and felt nothing. His wolf had not shifted in 3 years, not because it couldn't, as because Elliot wouldn't let it. A wolf unshifted is a wolf controlled. And control was the only currency he still trusted. But control has a price no one warns you about. The longer you cage something wild, the more it forgets what it is. The wolf inside him had gone quiet, not peaceful, not resting. Quiet the way a fire goes quiet when it's almost out. He stood at the glass that evening, long after the building had emptied, long after the city below had blurred into a scatter of cold lights, and pressed one hand flat against the window. The glass was freezing. He could feel it seeping into his palm, traveling up his arm. He left his hand there. There was a version of Elliot Drake that used to stand at windows and feel something when he looked out at the world. Possibility, hunger, that particular, but almost unbearable feeling of standing on the edge of something large. He pressed his hand harder against the glass. Nothing, just the cold, moving in. He didn't know, standing there in the silence of his 43rd floor, that 22 floors below, in the building's grand atrium, a charity event was being set up. Tables, flowers, the soft geometry of rented elegance. He didn't know that a woman was doing a sound check on a small stage in the corner, adjusting a microphone, clearing her throat, completely unaware that the man upstairs existed. He didn't know that in less than 3 hours, he would hear something that would move inside him like a crack in old ice. Slow, irreversible, and he would not know what to do with it. The atrium of the Lunaris Grand was the kind of place that tried too hard. Chandeliers that cost more than most packed territories. Marble floors polished to a mirror shine. Waitstaff moving between tables with the practiced invisibility of omegas, who had learned, young, that being noticed was rarely in their interest. Maya Bellamy had been one of those omegas once. She stood at the microphone now with her eyes closed, running one hand along the stand the way a blind woman reads a wall. Careful, deliberate, learning the room before the room learned her. This was something she did at every new venue, in every new city. Feel the space first. Understand what it holds. Because spaces hold things. Old grief, old joy, the echo of every shifted wolf that had ever padded across this floor or stood in this corner and felt the moon pull at their blood. This particular atrium held a great deal of cold. As she opened her eyes, the event coordinator, a beta female named Iris, sharp-shouldered and efficient, with the particular scent of low-grade anxiety that betas in service positions always carried, was speaking rapidly into an earpiece across the room. The setup crew were dragging tables into position. A packless omega, a rented microphone, a charity event for Lunaris's displaced wolves. Maya had played worse gigs. She had played gigs in establishments that didn't even know what she was. Human bars, roadside inns on the outskirts of packed territories. Once a funeral, the old-fashioned kind, where the dead wolf's family had gathered in their shifted forms in a clearing and needed something to sing them through the grief. She had sung for that too. This was what she was. A voice for hire, and moving between worlds that didn't entirely claim her. She reached into the front pocket of her coat, a coat too thin for a Lunaris winter, because she had not planned to still be in Lunaris in winter, had not planned to stay this long, and pulled out a small glass vial, inside it a clear liquid that caught the atrium light and held it briefly before letting it go. She held it for a moment, didn't drink it, just held it the way people hold things they are tired of needing. An old wolf herbalist in the Eastern Territories had given it to her 2 years ago, called it a tether. Something to slow the drain, he'd said. His exact words, quiet and serious over a fire that smelled of pine and old magic. Every song takes something. This slows the taking. She put it back in her pocket. It was getting less effective. She could feel that. Her true omega gifted with elemental voice, what the older wolves called a lunasa singer, born under a split moon when the boundary between the shifted world and the human one goes thin, was not supposed to exist without a pack anchor. The gift needed roots. Without roots, it fed on the singer herself. Every note she sent into the world returned not to a pack's collective energy, the way a bound wolf's gifts replenish through the moon cycle. It returned to nothing. It simply left. Taking with it, degree by degree, the warmth in her blood. 3 years of singing alone had cost her. She knew it in the way she knew her own reflection, intimately, with the specific exhaustion of someone who has looked at a difficult truth for so long that they have stopped flinching at it. Her scent, and which should have carried the deep earth warmth of a gifted omega in her prime, had thinned. Pack wolves who passed her on the street sometimes looked at her twice, not with desire, not with hostility, but with that involuntary animal concern that wolves feel when something living is dimming. Like watching a fire in the wind. She did not feel cold exactly. She felt less. Less than she had felt last year, less than the year before. As though someone were slowly, without drama, turning down the light inside her. The moon knew. She could feel it on clear nights. The pull of it, stronger now. As though the moon was trying to compensate for what she was losing. Calling her, warning her. The moon does not warn softly. It pressed against the inside of her ribs like a hand against glass. She ignored it the way she ignored most things that frightened her. With grace and enormous effort. She adjusted the microphone and played a single note on the small keyboard set up beside her. Listened to it move through the room. It touched the chandeliers and made them hum their agreement. It rolled across the marble floor and came back to her changed. Richer, heavier with the room's held history. She felt it leave her. Just a note. A small one. But she felt it the way you feel a small cut in cold water. Precise, immediate, the body registering the loss before the mind has finished forming the thought. She had maybe one more city in her, maybe two. After that, the ice in her veins would stop being a metaphor. She had not told anyone this. She rolled her shoulders back, lifted her chin, and spoke to the empty atrium with the confidence of someone who had learned to perform certainty so long that she occasionally forgot it was a performance. "Sound check," she said. "Testing." Her voice moved through the room like a living thing. 22 floors above her, a man pressed his hand against cold glass and felt for one fractured, inexplicable second. Warmth. He pulled his hand back, stared at his palm. The boardroom was completely silent. Nothing had changed. No one was there. The city glittered cold and indifferent below. And yet, he looked at his hand for a long moment, the way a man looks at something he cannot explain and is not yet willing to believe. Then he picked up his phone, scrolled past 17 unread messages, and did something he had not done in 3 years, 4 months, and 16 days. As he went downstairs, he took the private elevator. That was the first sign that something had already shifted in him, though he would not have admitted it standing at the brushed steel doors, watching the numbers descend. Elliot Drake did not attend charity events held in his own building. He funded them, generously, anonymously, with the particular detachment of a man who has decided that money is a cleaner form of care than presence. His assistant Nadia scheduled them. His building hosted them. He stayed on his floor and worked until the atrium went quiet again. He told himself he was going down to check the security arrangement. He told himself this with complete conviction, the way powerful men tell themselves comfortable lies, thoroughly, without hesitation, because the alternative is a conversation with yourself that you are not prepared to have in an elevator at 9:47 on a Tuesday night. The doors opened. The gala was already in motion. Packwolves in formal wear moved between tables dressed in white linen and winter florals, pale roses, silver eucalyptus, the kind of careful elegance that said someone had spent real money pretending effortlessness. The air carried the layered scent of 30 different wolves in proximity. Alphas holding their dominance politely in check. Betas running the room with quiet efficiency. Omegas clustered near the edges the way omegas always clustered at pack functions. Not from weakness, but from the learned wisdom of knowing that the edge of a room is the safest place to read it. Elliot stepped out of the elevator and stopped. He stood at the back, away from the tables, in the long shadow thrown by a structural column near the eastern wall. No one approached him. His scent preceded him the way an alpha's scent always does. A declaration, not a request. The room had registered him the moment the elevator opened. Conversations didn't stop, but they recalibrated. Postures shifted. The subtle, involuntary deference that lower-ranked wolves show in the presence of a dominant alpha moved through the room like a current through water. He ignored all of it, because the stage was occupied. She had her back to the room, adjusting something on the keyboard, shoulders moving under a simple dark dress that had no business looking the way it did. Her hair was loose. Marcy was speaking quietly to the sound technician beside her, a young packless male who was trying very hard to appear professional and failing in the way young males always fail around gifted omegas, which is completely and with their whole body. Elliot watched her and felt nothing he could name. That was the thing. That was what stopped him where he stood. Not desire. He understood desire, had filed it away years ago, unmanageable and largely irrelevant. Not curiosity. Something older than both. Something that moved not in his chest, not in his mind, but in the deep animal part of him that he had spent 3 years suppressing with the same grim discipline he applied to everything. His wolf moved, not shifted, not even close to shifted, but it moved the way something moves when it has been completely still for a very long time and suddenly, without warning, remembers that it is alive. A single, slow, seismic shift in the dark. Elliot put one hand against the column behind him. Steady. He needed to be steady. The event coordinator tapped a glass at the front of the room. The crowd settled into their seats with the practiced social choreography of pack gatherings, and a small introduction was made. The singer's name. Her contribution to the evening, something about the charity's mission that Elliot did not hear, because his entire attention had locked onto the moment Maya Bellamy turned around and faced the room. She scanned the crowd the way a wolf scans open ground, not nervously, carefully. Yet there was a difference that only other wolves understood. The difference between prey reading a space for exits and a predator reading it for information. She was neither exactly. She was something in between. Something that had learned to survive without the luxury of being one or the other. Her eyes moved across the tables, the faces, the exits. They did not reach the shadow where Elliot stood. Not yet. She adjusted the microphone one final time, closed her eyes, and in the 3 seconds of silence before she began, that particular silence that falls when a room collectively holds its breath without realizing it, Elliot felt his wolf go completely, utterly still. Not the stillness of suppression, not the stillness of a cage, the stillness of attention, pure and absolute. The way a wolf in a forest goes still when the wind changes and brings something it has never smelled before, and the whole animal self says, without words, "Wait." Then she sang. He had no framework for what happened next. The first note left her body and entered the room, and the room was not the same room anymore. This was not a metaphor. This was not sentiment or projection or the sort of romantic overstatement that lesser storytellers reach for when they lack precision. This was a physical phenomenon, observable, undeniable, measurable in the way every wolf in that room stiffened slightly and then slowly, involuntarily, softened. The Lunasa gift worked on wolves the way the moon worked on tides, not asking permission, not requiring belief, simply exerting itself. As because that is what true elemental force does. It does not negotiate. The old magic in her voice moved through the atrium like something that had been waiting in the walls, recognized its name being called, and answered. Elliot felt it hit him, and he stopped breathing. Not figuratively, he actually stopped breathing for 2 full seconds. Standing in the shadow of that column, hand flat against the stone, while Maya Bellamy's voice moved through his chest like a key turning in a lock he had forgotten existed. His wolf surged, not violently. That was the part that undid him completely, because he knew how to handle violence, how to handle aggression, how to meet force with force, and emerge intact. What he didn't know, had not known in years, had systematically removed from the repertoire of things he allowed himself, was this. Yet the surge was not rage, it was not dominance. It was grief and want and recognition all arriving at precisely the same moment. And his wolf, his silent, caged, half-extinguished wolf, pressed against every wall he had built and made a sound he felt in his teeth. A sound that translated, in the old wolf tongue, to something between found and finally. He pressed harder against the column. Across the room, Maya sang with her eyes closed, completely unaware that the most dangerous alpha in Lunaris was standing in the dark, watching her unravel 3 years of deliberate numbness with nothing but her voice. She sang the way she always sang, for survival, for the omegas in the room who needed someone to hold the sound, while they felt what they were too guarded to feel alone. She gave the notes the way people give from a diminishing supply, generously, because the generosity is the point, even when it costs. With every note she released, Elliot felt something in himself return that he had been certain was gone. And with every note she released, something in her went with it. Neither of them knew in that moment that these two things were connected, that his thawing and her freezing were not coincidence, were not separate events occurring in the same room on the same night by accident, were, in fact, the oldest and most dangerous kind of wolf magic, a tethering, unrequested, unwitnessed, already on some molecular level, already irreversible. The last note faded. The room broke into applause, warm, genuine, and the specific kind of applause that happens when a room full of wolves has been moved past the point of social performance into something real. Several omegas near the front were quietly wiping their eyes with the practiced subtlety of people pretending they are not. Maya opened her eyes, and this time, when she scanned the room, slowly coming back to herself the way a diver surfaces, blinking, readjusting to the world above water. Her gaze moved past the tables, past the applauding crowd, past the chandeliers and the white linen and the winter roses, and stopped. At the shadow near the eastern column, she could not see his face clearly, only the outline of him, tall, completely still, the particular stillness of an alpha at full attention, that which is one of the most unnerving things an omega can encounter because it means you have been seen in a way you did not consent to. She held the gaze for 1 second, 2. Something moved through her chest. Not warmth, not exactly, but the memory of warmth. The ghost of a temperature she had been losing for years, flickering briefly back, like an ember that isn't quite finished. She looked away first, turned back to her keyboard, straightened the microphone, reached into her coat pocket and wrapped her fingers around the cold glass vial. Her hand, she noticed, was shaking. Not from cold, from something she did not yet have a name for, something that frightened her far more than the ice in her veins, far more than the slow dimming, far more than any of the things she had learned to survive alone. And it frightened her because it felt, for the first time in longer than she could remember, like something worth being afraid of losing. He sent her flowers the next morning, no card. Maya stood in the doorway of her rented room, a small serviceable space above a pack house on the south side of Lunaris, the kind of place that catered to lone wolves passing through, where the sheets smelled faintly of strangers and the window faced a wall, and stared at the arrangement sitting outside her door like it had arrived from a different reality entirely. White roses, winter-cut, frost-edged, the petals holding that particular stillness of things that had survived cold and come out of it more beautiful for it. No card, no scent marker. Whoever had sent them had been careful about that. Deliberately scentless delivery, which required effort, which meant resources, which meant this was not a packless wolf playing at romance. She left them in the hallway, went back inside, sat on the edge of the bed, pressed both palms flat on her knees, and breathed the way the old herbalist had taught her, slow and deliberate, drawing the breath down past the chest, into the belly, coaxing warmth to places it was beginning to abandon. She thought about the shadow by the eastern column, the stillness of him, the weight of a gaze she had felt before she had found its source, the way wolves feel a dominant alpha's attention not as a social experience, but as a physical one. Pressure, unmistakable, like a change in altitude. She thought about the tremor in her hand. She picked up her bag, slung it over one shoulder, and went to find breakfast. She did not take the flowers. She told herself this was practical. She told herself a great many things that morning, with the focused efficiency of a woman who has survived this long, precisely because she is very good at not listening to herself. He had her name by 6 that morning. This was not difficult. Elliot Drake had the kind of resources that made information a formality rather than a challenge. By 6:15, he had her full profile: Maya Bellamy, 28 years old, unaffiliated Omega. No pack registration in any of the 7 Lunaris territories or the 14 surrounding ones. Born in the coastal pack of Meridian Cove to a bonded pair. Both deceased. One known gift, classified in the old registry under elemental vocal, Lunasa singer, rare designation, last recorded case 11 years prior. He read the file twice, then he read the line about her parents a third time. Both deceased. No pack transfer recorded, which meant at some point, possibly young, possibly very young, Maya Bellamy had been left with a rare and consuming gift, and absolutely no one to show her how to carry it. He understood with the particular clarity of a man who had spent years building walls, exactly what that does to a person. Not intellectually, in his bones. He closed the file, told himself he was done, opened it again 40 minutes later. She was at the South Market when he found her, or when she found him, depending on how honestly you're willing to tell the story. The South Market was packless territory in the truest sense, a strip of covered stalls where unaffiliated wolves traded without politics, and where the rule was commerce and the currency was discretion. Maya was buying dried lun root from an elderly Omega vendor, the kind used in voice care tonics, and the elderly vendor was pretending not to notice that the young woman's scent had the thin, fraying quality of a wolf burning through her own reserves. He appeared at the edge of the stall the way dominant alphas appear in spaces, not entering so much as simply becoming present, the way weather becomes present. The temperature around him was different. The air near an unshifted alpha of his bloodline carries something ancient and electric, like standing near a cliff edge in a storm. Several wolves at adjacent stalls registered it and made small, unconscious adjustments, stepped back, looked away, gave the space that the old wolf instinct demands. Maya registered it too. She did not step back. She turned slowly, lunroot in hand, and looked at him with the particular expression of a woman who had been expecting this, and is furious with herself for having expected it. He looked at her the way he looked at everything, with complete, unnerving attention. As though she were a document he was reading for the clause that changed everything. "You left the flowers," he said. "I don't accept gifts without knowing who sent them." "You knew." She held his gaze. Her wolf, even diminished, even fraying at the edges, recognized his. The old instinct moved through her, that deep biological acknowledgement that one predator makes to another, involuntary and inconvenient. "What do you want?" "I don't know yet," he said. It was the most honest thing Elliot Drake had said to another living being in 3 years, and it clearly cost him something to say it, and that was precisely the problem. Because Maya felt it land, felt it move through the thin places in her defenses, the way cold moves through old walls, finding the cracks, finding every place where the insulation had worn down. She paid for the lun root, took the balance, started walking, He walked with her, not beside her exactly. A half step behind and to the left. Not following, not leading. The position a wolf takes when it is not trying to assert and not willing to retreat. She noticed. Of course she noticed. She was a Lunasa singer, built from the ground up to read the emotional frequencies of every wolf in a room. She could feel the conflict coming off him like heat off stone in winter. The want and the resistance. The pull and the push. At the fundamental contradiction of a dominant alpha who was accustomed to knowing exactly what he was doing and was, for the first time in years, not entirely sure. It should have been reassuring. A vulnerable alpha is a less dangerous alpha. It was not reassuring at all. Because here is the thing nobody tells you about emotionally unavailable people. And this is the question you need to sit with today. The one that might crack something open in your own chest. Have you ever met someone whose damage was so specific, so precisely shaped, that it fit against your own damage like a key fits a lock? And you had to choose, consciously, every single day, whether to turn it? Maya walked faster. I looked you up, he said, behind her. I know. Your parents. Don't. The word came out quiet and absolute. The way an omega draws a boundary when the boundary is the last wall standing. Not aggressive, not pleading, just final. He stopped walking, and she felt the absence of him at her back before she heard his footsteps cease. Felt it as a drop in pressure, a sudden cold where warmth had briefly, inexplicably been. She kept walking, didn't look back. The market noise filled in around her. She made it half a block before she slowed. Stood still in the middle of the covered lane, pack wolves moving around her, lunroot in her coat pocket, and felt the ice in her veins do something it had not done in longer than she could trace. It did not advance, it did not recede, it simply paused, as though something in her blood was waiting. She stared at the cobblestones. Behind her, she could still feel the weight of him standing exactly where she had left him. Not following, not leaving. An alpha who would not chase and would not go. Who had learned, are in the brutal school of his own suffering, that the things you pursue the hardest are the things most likely to break. The ice in her veins waited. Her wolf, threadbare and dimming, turned its muzzle in his direction. And Maya Bellamy, who had survived everything alone, who had made a discipline of surviving alone, felt the thing she feared most, not the cold. Not the slow diminishing, the unmistakable, treacherous warmth of wanting someone to stay. The ice always wins, until it doesn't. She sang for him on a Thursday. He hadn't asked. That was the part that stayed with her afterward, in the particular way that certain moments stay. Not as memory exactly, but as a bruise. Something you keep pressing because the tenderness reminds you it was real. He hadn't asked, and she hadn't planned it. And that made it the most dangerous kind of thing. It had started simply, the way the most irreversible things always start. Simply, quietly, with no visible warning that you are standing at the edge of something that will change the shape of your life. They had been meeting for 11 days, not dates. Maya was precise about this in her own mind, with the fierce linguistic precision of a woman who understands that what you call something determines how much power you give it. Not dates. Mornings, mostly. The South Market, twice. A packless coffee house near the border of the Third Territory, where the owner knew better than to ask an unregistered alpha and a lone omega what their business was. Once, memorably, at the rooftop of his building at 2 a.m. because neither of them could sleep, and she had sent a message. She still wasn't sure why she'd sent it, had stared at her phone for 20 minutes before she did. That said simply, "Are you awake?" And he had replied in under 4 seconds, which told her everything she needed to know about how awake he was. 11 days of conversations that moved like wolf stalking through undergrowth. Slow, deliberate, with long silences that said more than the words on either side of them. He talked about the business sometimes, about Lunaris, about pack politics with the measured disdain of a man who had built an empire inside a system he had long since stopped respecting. He never talked about Cole. She never pushed. She talked about the cities she had moved through, the gifts she had used. As she spoke about her Lunasa singer heritage the way you speak about a chronic illness. Matter-of-factly, without self-pity, with just enough detail to be honest, and not enough to invite the particular kind of concern that feels more like burden than care. She did not tell him about the ice. On the 11th day, he arrived at the coffee house before her, which he never did. And she knew before she pushed through the door that something had broken open in him overnight. She could smell it. An alpha and emotional fracture has a scent that no training and no discipline can fully suppress. It is the smell of a wolf whose human half is losing the argument. Something raw and mineral and old, like stone split by frost. He was sitting with both hands flat on the table, staring at something she couldn't see. She sat down across from him, and he said nothing for a long time. She let him say nothing, because she understood instinctively the difference between silence that wants to be filled and silence that needs to be witnessed. She sat with him in it. Ordered nothing. Watched his jaw work on something he wasn't yet ready to release. Cole used to come here, he finally said. Maya went still. Every Saturday morning, same table. He always ordered the same thing. Black coffee and whatever pastry they'd burned slightly, because he said the burnt ones had more character. Something moved across Elliot's face that was not quite a smile and not quite grief, and was in fact the specific expression of someone encountering a memory they have been avoiding so successfully, they'd almost convinced themselves it no longer existed. He was an idiot, he said softly, and it was the most love Maya had ever heard, compressed into 3 words. She felt it move through her chest. And then without deciding to, without the safety of decision, without the buffer of intention, she began to sing. Not loudly, barely above a whisper, the old grief song. The one the coastal packs sang when they released their dead to the tide. The one her mother had sung to her before her mother had become someone the past tense applied to. It was not a performance. It was not a gift, consciously given. It was the sound that rises in a Lunasa singer. When the room reaches a frequency the voice simply cannot leave unanswered. It lasted perhaps 40 seconds. When it ended, Elliot was looking at her with an expression she had no category for, something so unguarded, so stripped of the alpha architecture he wore like a second skeleton that it almost didn't look like his face. His eyes were wet. He didn't blink. She understood that he would not acknowledge the tears, and that acknowledging them herself would be a violence, so she looked at the table and gave him the privacy of pretending she hadn't seen. What she didn't tell him was what it cost her. She felt it the moment the last note left her body. Not the usual gradual leaching, the slow tax she had grown accustomed to paying. This was different. This was the sensation of something essential being pulled from a place deeper than she had known the gift could reach. Below the voice, below the chest, somewhere in the architecture of her wolf self, where the warmth lived, that had nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with being alive. As she gripped the edge of the table under its surface where he couldn't see, the ice moved, not crept, moved. With intention, with velocity, the way a frozen river moves when the season finally loses patience. A crack, and then a rush, and then a terrible, indifferent momentum. It spread from her sternum outward, along her ribs, down her left arm to her fingertips. She felt her fingers go numb against the table edge, felt the cold hit the base of her throat where the voice lives. She smiled at him. She smiled at him, and it was the bravest and most devastating thing she had done in years, because she was sitting across from the man whose healing was killing her, and she was smiling because the alternative was telling him the truth. The truth was something she was not ready to hand to a man who had not yet learned how to hold fragile things without tightening his grip. She went home and stood in her small bathroom and pressed both palms flat against the cold mirror and looked at herself with the brutality that only complete privacy allows. Her reflection looked back. She pulled back her sleeve, along the inside of her left forearm, where the skin is thinnest, where a wolf's pulse point sits closest to the surface. The veins had changed, not dramatically, not visibly to anyone who didn't know what they were looking at. But she knew. She had been watching them for months. They had been the deep blue of healthy wolf blood. Oxygenated, moon-fed, warm. They were pale now, the specific translucent pale of ice over deep water. As she pulled her sleeve back down, sat on the edge of the bathtub. And here is where the question lives. The one that will follow you out of this story and into your own life. The one that matters more than any of the wolf magic or the moon pool or the ancient curse. How much of yourself are you allowed to give to someone else's healing before it becomes self-destruction? And who gets to draw that line? Because Maya had been drawing it wrong for years. She knew that. Had known it with the quiet, helpless clarity of someone who can diagnose the problem in perfect detail and still cannot stop themselves from doing the thing. She gave. That was her nature, her gift, her inheritance from a mother who had given until there was nothing left to give and had called it love, and maybe it was love. Maybe that was exactly what love was. And maybe that was the most terrifying sentence she had ever assembled in her own mind. Maybe giving until you disappear is the only love she knew how to do. She sat on the bathtub edge for a long time. Her phone lit up. A message. From Elliot. 3 words. No punctuation, the way his messages always arrived. Not rude, just stripped of everything non-essential, which was its own kind of intimacy. Thank you, genuinely. She stared at the message. Something cracked in her chest that had nothing to do with ice. She started to type back. Stopped. Started again. Her left hand, and the numb one, fumbled the phone, and she grabbed it before it fell. And in grabbing it, she knocked the glass vial from the bathroom shelf. It hit the tile, shattered. The tether liquid spread across the cold white floor in a thin, clear pool. It caught the bathroom light and was gone, absorbed into nothing, irretrievable. Maya sat very still, looking at the broken glass. Outside, the Lunaris wind pressed against the window, with the low, deliberate moan of a warning. The moon was full tonight. She could feel it pulling at whatever warmth she had left, with an urgency it had never used before, the way someone grips your arm when you are too close to an edge. She looked at her pale, translucent veins. She looked at the shattered vial. She looked at those 3 words on her phone screen. And somewhere in the building across the city, in the 43rd floor boardroom with the bare walls, Elliot Drake stood at the glass and felt, for the 11th consecutive night, the warmth that had no source he could name. And this time, beneath it, something else. By something that moved through the bond that neither of them had yet admitted existed. That traveled the invisible tether between Lunaris, singer, and the wolf she had accidentally begun to save. A tremor, faint, cold, coming from her direction. He pressed his hand against the glass. His wolf was on its feet now, fully, for the first time in 3 years. Not shifted. Not even close. But standing, alert. Every ancient instinct rising to the surface with a single, unified, urgent message that bypassed thought entirely and landed in his chest like a stone in still water. Something is wrong. He reached for his keys, the pack, the lie, and the locked wolf. He drove to her building in 4 minutes. The drive should have taken 11. He knew this city the way all alphas know their territory. not from maps but from muscle memory, but from the accumulated knowledge of a body that had moved through these streets long enough that the turns happened before the decisions did. He took corners too fast and didn't care, and his wolf was so present, so fully awake and pressing against the inside of his skin, that his hands on the steering wheel were trembling. Elliot Drake's hands did not tremble. He looked at them at a red light, and something cold moved through him that had nothing to do with the Lunaris winter. He had not seen his own hands shake since the night they told him about Cole, since he had stood in the corridor of the Lunaris General Packhouse Infirmary, and a beta medic had said the words, and the words had not made sense for several long seconds. Ar had arranged and rearranged themselves in his mind, refusing to form the shape of the thing they were trying to tell him, and then they had formed it, and he had put one hand against the wall and looked at it trembling and made himself stop, made himself be still, made himself into the thing he had been making himself into ever since. The light turned green. He drove. Her building light was on. 3rd floor, the window facing the wall. He had noted it the first time she mentioned where she was staying, had noted it with the territorial instinct of an alpha who catalogs the location of everyone who matters and tells himself it is strategy rather than care. He was out of the car before it had fully stopped. Through the entrance before the packhouse door attendant, an older Omega male, half asleep at the desk, had time to stand. He took the stairs. She opened the door before he knocked. She had felt him coming. Of course she had. A Lunasa singer in even partial attunement with a wolf of his bloodline would feel that approach the way you feel thunder before you hear it, in the chest, in the places where the body keeps its oldest knowledge. She stood in the doorway in a gray pullover and bare feet, her left arm slightly behind her body in a posture that was not quite casual and not quite deliberate, and looked at him with an expression that was trying very hard to be neutral and was not succeeding. He looked at her face, and then, because his wolf was driving now more than his mind was, he looked at her left arm. "Show me," he said. "Elliot." Maya. Her name in his mouth, quiet and wrecked. "Show me your arm." The silence between them had weight. As she held it for a moment, that particular exhausted moment of a person who has been carrying something alone for so long that being seen is almost more painful than continuing to carry it unseen. Then she brought her left arm forward and pushed the sleeve up. He looked at her veins. His wolf made a sound inside him that had no human translation. The closest approximation in the language of the pack was the sound a bonded wolf makes when its mate is wounded. Not anger, not even grief, but something underneath both. Something foundational and irreversible. The sound of a fundamental order being violated. He reached out and took her arm in both hands, carefully, the way you handle something that is simultaneously precious and damaged. His thumbs rested either side of her wrist, not over the pale veins, just beside them, so as though he could warm them from the outside by proximity alone. His hands had stopped shaking. "How long?" he said. "A while?" "How long, Maya?" She looked at him. "Long enough that the tether vial is gone, and the herbalist who made it died 8 months ago, and there is no one in the 7 territories who knows the formulation." She said it simply, not to devastate him, just because she was tired of managing how the truth landed. "Every time I sing for you, it accelerates, not punishes. I need you to understand that it's not a punishment. It's a mechanics problem. It's the way the gift works without a pack anchor. It feeds on me because there's nothing else to feed on. You've been getting warmer. I've been getting... Don't." His voice fractured on the single syllable. She looked at him steadily. "That you came here because you felt it. I felt something wrong. That's the tether. It's been forming since the gala. Since the first note." She paused. "I didn't do it on purpose. I know that. And I can't undo it." The words settled between them. He was still holding her arm. Neither of them moved. Outside, the The Lunaris wind pressed against the window with a persistence that felt personal, and the moon was enormous and white and utterly indifferent to the two wolves standing in a third-floor doorway, trying to absorb the weight of what was happening between them. "Come inside," she said finally. "There's something else." She had found it 3 days ago and had not told him. She had found it the way most devastating things are found. By accident, while looking for something else. She had been at the Lunaris pack registry, as the old stone building on the eastern border where the pack histories were kept in physical ledgers, because the old alphas had never trusted digital records with anything that truly mattered. She had been researching Lunasa Singer precedents, looking for documentation of cases where the gift had been managed without a pack anchor, any record of survival that might offer a map. Instead, she had found a ledger entry dated 3 years, 4 months, and 17 days ago. She placed it on the table in front of him now, a copied page, her handwriting transcribing what she had read because they didn't allow photographs of the original records. He sat down and read it. She watched him read it, or she watched his face do the thing that faces do when the mind encounters something it recognizes and does not want to recognize. A split second of clarity, followed by the attempt to deny the clarity, followed by the collapse of the denial, followed by something so raw and uncontrolled that it was painful to witness in a man who had built his entire identity on being impossible to unravel. The ledger entry named the wolf, who had reported Cole Drake's location to the rival faction that had ordered his death. The wolf who had provided the access codes to Cole's personal territory. The wolf who had signed the document with a pack seal that Elliot would have recognized in his sleep. I had signed it and then gone to the funeral and stood at the front and placed a hand on Elliot's shoulder and said the words that people say when they are performing grief. Rather than feeling it, his name was Marcus Vale. Elliot's second in command, the beta male who had run the Drake pack operations for 9 years, who had been Cole's closest friend inside the pack, who had sat across from Elliot in that boardroom every week for 3 years, while Elliot rebuilt everything Cole's death had destroyed, who had watched Elliot go cold and silent and locked, and had offered nothing, not confession, not guilt, not even the microscopic tell of a wolf who carries a secret, or because Marcus Vale was either the finest dissembler Elliot had ever encountered, or a wolf so thoroughly convinced of his own justifications that the guilt had simply stopped functioning. Elliot set the page down. He was completely still. This was not the stillness of the boardroom, not the cultivated, weaponized stillness of an alpha managing a room. This was the stillness of a structure that has taken a critical hit and has not yet determined whether it is going to hold or collapse. His wolf was not still at all. She could feel it through the tether, feel it clawing at every wall simultaneously, feel the 3 years of locked silence tearing open all at once with a violence that made her chest ache. Elliot. He was at the funeral, he said. I know. He gave the eulogy. His voice was completely flat, on the flatness of something beyond feeling, the emotional equivalent of a landscape after detonation. He stood at the front of the room and he talked about Cole for 8 minutes and He stopped. I thanked him. After. I thanked him for the words. Maya said nothing. There was nothing to say. She understood this particular horror. The horror not of betrayal itself, but of betrayal retrospectively consuming every moment of trust that preceded it, rewriting every memory, turning every warmth into evidence of your own blindness. She understood it because she was sitting across from a man she was falling in love with, while the act of loving him was slowly turning her veins to ice, and she had not told him the full truth of it until tonight. And she was not entirely sure that made her different from Marcus Vale, or just differently motivated in her silence. That thought had been living in her for days. It was living in her now. His wolf broke, not shifted. The shift never came, which was almost worse. Instead, the locked wolf inside him hit every barrier at once with 3 years of compressed anguish behind it. And the sound that left Elliot Drake, this controlled, fearless, impenetrable man, was not a howl and not a sob, but something between the two. Something ancient and animal that had no place in boardrooms or power structures, or any of the architecture he had built to replace the feeling parts of himself. He put his face in his hands. Maya crossed the room. She sat beside him and did not speak and did not touch him and did not sing. She did not sing because she understood now completely what it cost, and she was choosing this time, consciously, to pay a different kind of price. She simply stayed. Stayed the way pack wolves stay with each other in the aftermath of things that cannot be undone. Present, close, breathing. His wolf felt her beside him and quieted by degrees. After a long time, he lifted his head. His face was not the face of the alphaking. It was the face of a man who had been carrying an unbearable weight in the wrong direction for 3 years, and had just been turned around to see exactly how far from home he had walked. He looked at her arm. "I won't let you keep singing," he said. "That's not your decision. Maya, it was never your decision. Gentle. Absolute." He looked at her with an expression that she felt in her bones, need and terror, and the particular anguish of a dominant wolf confronting the limits of what dominance can protect. He could face Marcus Val. He could burn the betrayal to the ground, dismantle everything built on it, rebuild from the scorched foundation. He had the tools for that. He had spent years sharpening those tools. He did not have tools for this. For a woman choosing to diminish so that he could be whole. For love that looked, from certain angles, indistinguishable from sacrifice. "There has to be another way," he said. She looked at her pale veins, looked at him, opened her mouth to answer. Her phone rang. Unknown number, Lunaris area code. She answered because something in her wolf told her to. At that deep instinct that knows before the mind does when a call is the kind that changes the direction of a night. The voice on the other end was old, female, a wolf whose age she could hear in the register of it. Ancient in the way of wolves who have lived through enough moon cycles that the voice itself carries sediment. "Maya Bellamy," the voice said, not a question. "Yes, I knew your mother. I know what is happening to you. I know what it will cost." Another pause, longer, weighted with something Maya could not name. "And I know something about the Drake bloodline that the Drake bloodline has never been told." Maya looked at Elliot. He was watching her face. She turned slightly away from him and said into the phone, quietly, "What do you know?" The old wolf's answer was 4 sentences. By the 3rd sentence, Maya's hand was gripping the phone so hard the casing creaked. By the 4th, she understood that everything she thought she knew about the tether, about the ice, about the cost of loving Elliot Drake, was only half the truth. And the other half was going to change everything. The old wolf's name was Seraphine Voss. As she lived 40 minutes outside Lunaris in a stone house that sat at the edge of the Ashvin woods like it had grown there, like the forest had simply decided 1 century to leave a space in the shape of a dwelling, and Seraphine had moved into it, and neither party had felt the need to discuss the arrangement. The house smelled of pine resin, cold ash, and the particular deep earth scent of a wolf who had lived so long and witnessed so much that her very presence had become indistinguishable from the land she occupied. Maya went alone. Elliot had not agreed to this. That was not the same as accepting it, and she understood the difference. An alpha who has not agreed and an alpha who has accepted occupy completely different emotional territories, and the one she left standing in her doorway at midnight was very firmly in the first, as she had felt his wolf tracking her across the city through the tether. a low constant pressure at the base of her skull like a thumb against a pulse point, all the way until she crossed the Ashfin border, where the old woods magic interfered with pack bonds, the way thick walls interfere with signal. Then silence, just her and the dark and the 40-minute drive that felt like the longest passage of her life. Seraphine was already at the door when she arrived. The old wolf was small in the way of people whose power has never required size. Compact and still, with eyes that were the pale amber of a wolf who had shifted so many times across so many decades that the human and animal selves had simply stopped pretending to be distinct. She looked at Maya the way the old herbalist had looked at her, like the way every truly old wolf looked at her, with a sorrow that was not pity, which is the most devastating kind of sorrow there is.
Come in. You don't have much time. The other half of the truth is this. The Drake bloodline carried a moon debt, generations back, 4, maybe 5, in the time when the old pack covenants were still written in blood rather than ink. An ancestor of Elliot's line had made a bargain with the Lunasa, not with the singer, with the source itself, the elemental force that gifted singers like you. He had asked for dominance beyond the natural order, for an alpha line that could not be broken or overthrown, and the Lunasa had agreed, because elemental forces do not refuse power transactions. They simply ensure the accounting is eventually settled. The debt is this. When a Lunasa singer and a Drake alpha formed a tether, the singer's warmth would flow toward the alpha until one of two things happened. Either the singer's fire went out completely, or the alpha gave back what his bloodline had taken, not metaphorically, not symbolically, a true return, the alpha surrendering the locked dominance, the caged wolf, the hoarded power that his ancestor had purchased at someone else's expense, giving it back to the moon, choosing vulnerability over control, choosing, in the most literal wolf covenant sense, to be broken open rather than to remain whole at the cost of another. If the alpha could not do it, if the lock held, the singer died. If the alpha could do it, the singer was freed. And the alpha became something the Drake line had not produced in 5 generations. Not weaker, not lesser, unshackled.
Maya sat with this for a long time in Seraphine's stone kitchen. While the old wolf made tea, neither of them would drink, and the Ashfin woods pressed against the windows with patient, ancient attention. He has to choose it, Maya said. Yes. I can't sing it into him. No. I can't ask him. If I ask him, it negates the covenant. It has to be his choice, made without the asking. Seraphine looked at her over the rim of her cup. There is one thing you can do. Maya waited, and then the woman said, You can sing for yourself. Not for him, not for the room, not for the grief of strangers or the comfort of a man you love. You have never once in your adult life, Maya Bellamy, used your gift for your own soul. She said it without cruelty, which made it land harder than cruelty would have. The Lunasa gift does not only drain, it returns when it is finally, turned inward, when the singer stops giving and starts living. If you sing for yourself fully without holding back, without thinking of him, the song will reach him anyway, through the tether, and he will feel what it actually costs you, not as information, as experience, wolf to wolf, soul to soul. Another pause, and then he will choose. Maya stared at the table. What if he can't? She whispered. Seraphine's silence was its own answer. She drove back to Lunaris as the sky began its gray pre-dawn uncertainty. That ambiguous hour when the night hasn't finished and the day hasn't committed, and the city looked like something caught between two versions of itself. She did not go to him. She went to the atrium. The building was empty, as she had known it would be at 4 a.m, and she didn't question how she got in. Only that the door was unlocked, and the atrium was dark except for the ambient city light filtering through the glass ceiling, turning everything silver and cold and cathedral still. She stood at the microphone, the same stage, the same room where it had all begun, where one song had cracked a wall in a man who didn't know he had heard her. She reached for the stand the way she always did, carefully learning the room. But this time, when she closed her eyes, she did not think of Elliot. She thought of herself at 7 years old, singing alone on the coastal rocks after her mother died, singing because the sea was the only thing big enough to hold the sound of her grief. She thought of every city, every rented room, how every morning she had woken up and felt slightly less warm than the morning before, and had gotten up anyway and kept moving anyway. She thought of every note she had given away, every piece of herself she had released into rooms that absorbed it and gave back nothing. She thought of what she was worth when no one was watching, and she opened her mouth. What came out was not a song anyone had heard before. It had no melody in the conventional sense, no structure, no beginning designed for an audience. It was the sound of a wolf finally, after years of exile, calling herself home. Raw and enormous and so purely honest that the atrium chandeliers trembled on their fittings, and the marble floor carried the vibration all the way to the walls, and the walls sent it upward, floor by floor, but through the bones of the building, all the way to the 43rd floor, where Elliot Drake woke from a dead sleep, sat upright in the dark, and felt the full weight of what loving her was costing her, hit him not as information but as sensation, as ice in his own veins, as warmth draining from his own chest, as the specific, unbearable experience of disappearing slowly while pretending to be fine. And his wolf, 3 years locked, hit the final wall with everything it had. The lock cracked. He was out of bed and moving before he was fully conscious of moving, crossing the room with his wolf so present in his body that his vision had sharpened and his hands were trembling again. And this time he did not try to stop the trembling. This time he ran toward it. He hit the stairwell door at a full sprint, 30 floors below him. And Maya sang for her own life, her own warmth, her own worth, and didn't know if he was coming. He heard her before he reached the ground floor, not with his ears, with everything else, the tether pulling taut as a wire in high wind, his wolf surging forward through 30 floors of stairwell with a desperation that had nothing to do with dominance, and everything to do with the oldest, most ungovernable wolf instinct there is. Not possession, not control. The instinct that says, this one matters. Do not be too late. He hit the atrium door at full force and stopped. Because what was happening inside that room was not something you walked into. It was something you witnessed, something that demanded you stand at the threshold and understand, before you moved another step, exactly what you were in the presence of. Yet Maya was at the microphone with her eyes closed and her arms slightly open at her sides, not performing, not projecting, not giving anything to any room or any wolf or any person. She was entirely, completely inside herself. The song had no melody he could name and no structure he could follow, and it was the most devastating thing he had ever heard, because it was not for him. For the first time since he had known her voice, this was not for him, and the absence of that direction, the radical self-containment of it, hit him with more force than any note she had ever aimed at his frozen interior. He felt her through the tether, all of her, unfiltered. The full accumulated weight of what the years had cost her, the warmth she had given and the warmth she had lost. and the specific quiet heroism of a woman who had kept singing anyway, kept showing up anyway, kept choosing warmth as a practice even as it diminished her. He felt the ice in her veins as his own, felt it in his chest, his arms, his throat. He understood then, standing at the threshold, that there was no version of this where he remained intact and she paid the price. That the choice was not between loving her and losing her. The choice was between releasing what his bloodline had hoarded across 5 generations of dominant wolves, who had never once considered what it cost the world to hold that much power without returning anything, or watching the warmest thing he had ever encountered in his cold and careful life go permanently, irreversibly silent. He did not decide. That is the part that matters most. There was no decision, no calculated weighing of options, no alpha assessment of risk versus outcome. His wolf simply stepped forward, and the lock that had held for 3 years, 4 months, and 17 days did not break. It dissolved, like ice in a warm current, like frost on glass when the sun finally clears the buildings. Not violently, not triumphantly, but with the quiet, cellular certainty of a thing returning to its natural state. The locked dominance, the hoarded power, the ancestral debt. He felt it leave him the way you feel a fever break, the way you feel a weight removed from your back, that you carried so long you had stopped feeling it as weight and started feeling it as self. His wolf shifted. After 3 years, 4 months, and 17 days, his wolf shifted, not in the atrium. It did not need to. The shift was internal, at the truest kind, the realignment of a wolf self that had been so long divided from its human half that the reunion felt like a bone set back into its socket, painful and right and accompanied by the specific relief of a thing clicking back into the place it was always meant to occupy. He crossed the atrium floor. Maya's song was fading, not dying, fading, the way a fire fades when it has burned what it needed to burn, and is settling now into something sustainable and steady. She was still standing. That was the first thing he checked, the wolf in him checking before the man did. Still standing, still warm. Warmer? Something returning to her face in real time that he watched with the helpless attention of someone witnessing a miracle that is happening too fast and too quietly, and he is terrified that if he blinks, he will miss the moment of it. Her veins when she opened her eyes and he took her arm in both hands were no longer pale. They were deep blue, moon-fed, warm. She looked at them, then at him, then at the space around him that had changed. The way pack wolves feel an alpha who has released forced dominance. The quality of the air near him. Lighter now, cleaner, like a room after a window has been opened. She felt his wolf through the tether, her breath caught. "You shifted," she whispered. "I came back," he said, which was not the same thing and was also exactly the same thing. And she looked at him for a long moment with an expression he had never seen on her face before. Not guarded, not careful, not the magnificent performance of a woman managing how much of herself she allowed to be visible. Just her, fully present, fully warm, fully alive in a way she had been moving away from for 3 years without a map back. She opened her mouth. He said very quietly, "Don't sing for me." She stopped. "Just," he paused. "Stay, just stay." She looked at him. At the man beneath the alphaking, the soul beneath the ice, the wolf that had finally, after everything, come home to itself. She looked at him the way you look at something that has cost you enormously and turned out to be worth it. And you are not sure whether to laugh or grieve the years it took to get here. And you do both, slightly, at the same time. "Tja, okay," she said. Outside, Lunaris was still cold. It would always be cold. That was the nature of the city, of the winter, of the particular kind of place that asks its inhabitants to choose, daily, between numbness and the courage of feeling things fully. The snow was still falling, the ice was still on the streets, but in the atrium of the Lunaris Grand, the temperature had changed, not dramatically, not magically, just differently. The specific, unspectacular, irreversible way that things change when two people who have been surviving separately decide, without fanfare, to stop. And 3 days later, in a small pack house on the eastern border, an old Buddha was cleaning out Marcus Vile's former office when he found, tucked behind a false panel in the lower desk drawer, a second document. Older than the first, written in a hand none of the current pack members recognized, signed with a seal that should not have existed, because Marcus Vile had not acted alone, and the wolf who had given the original order was still inside the pack, still attending the weekly meetings, still sitting every Thursday at the same boardroom table, still watching, still waiting, still wearing the face of someone Elliot Drake trusted without question, still wearing the face of someone Maya had already met. So here is what will keep you awake tonight. The question that has no clean answer, the one that lives in the space between the warmth of this ending and the cold of what is still coming. When someone shows you exactly who they are, do you see them, or do you see who you need them to be? Drop your thoughts in the comments section, share, and kindly subscribe for more amazing stories.